morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the places at Hawk Blogger. It is a Monday morning after a really eventful wildcard weekend, and we've got a great show today. So going to be talking to Robert Mays here in about 10 minutes. 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. It will be our last show of the season with Robert Mays. We'll figure out if we can do some stuff during the lead up to the draft and free agency and all that. But as of now, we get to celebrate our final episode with Robert Mays. It'll be a good one. And we will talk about all that happened in Wildcard Weekend and potential implications for the Seahawks and lessons that you should learn. So we're going to go through pretty much all the games. I'm not sure we'll hit each and every one, but we will talk about for each game, what were the lessons learned? What were maybe some things not to take away from the game? We will also talk about for the teams that exited, their season ended this weekend. What's Robert's optimism scale for, on a scale of 1 to 5, how optimistic should the fans of that team be about what's coming up next season? We'll talk about that because I think there's some interesting aspects of what we saw this weekend that have some potential implications for a team like Seattle that's still trying to build towards not only being part of this weekend, but weekends to follow. So we will talk about that. We will also get to some thoughts about, current conversations around the Seahawks. And I'll definitely get Robert's input on the offensive coordinator situation and some of the names that came out. We will definitely start to hear more names for the Seahawks come in this week for sure. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I'm going to get started with a couple of my thoughts. Before I do, please make sure you give the show a like, click subscribe. Appreciate all of you for tuning in as always. There is a report today that I just want to get to. I'm going to go through a couple bits of latest news. Clint Kubiak, who we know has been already linked to the Seahawks as a OC candidate, is also going to interview today with the Browns for their offensive coordinator job. So he will talk to the Seahawks tomorrow. So he's gone to a couple of places, or he will be going to a couple of places, and just wanted to give you that latest bit of news. As far as other pieces of news, nothing yet. I mean, obviously Mike Vrabel was hired in New England. So that position has been filled. Just got word that the Cowboys are saying that the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy are going to part ways. So Mike McCarthy will no longer be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. It'll be interesting to see which direction they go. Does Deion Sanders get a call? Bill Belichick was the guy all along I would have thought would have ended up there. Is there a chance that he jilts North Carolina and heads down to Dallas? Curious to see what happens down there. Also curious if Mike McCarthy ends up getting a chance somewhere else. Does Chicago end up going for him? Does one of these other teams show some interest? Do the Jets, potentially look at that? So we'll find out. Yeah, and I'm already seeing a report that Bill Belichick would have been interested in the Cowboys head coaching job had he known the position would be available. So have to see what happens with that. I'm going to... Excuse me, had to sneeze there. Hopefully I saved you from it. But really going to be interesting to see what happens with Mike McCarthy. One thing that I want to throw out there, gonna drop an early bomb on the show today. There's something I was thinking about as I was taking my dog Finn for a walk this morning, and I was listening to a couple different podcasts and just thinking about what was going to happen with Seattle this year. And obviously the two biggest storylines for the Seahawks as far as players on the team go are Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. And I think most of the conversation is gonna revolve around Geno Smith for obvious reasons. But one of the things I thought about is, as I've been getting up to speed on draft prep, and will continue to do that and have a lot left to go there, one of the things that's very clear is this draft is really thin on receiver. And the other piece that is clear to me is that there's going to be a lot of teams with good young quarterbacks that are going to be looking for a difference-making receiver. And if DK Metcalf was available in this draft, I think he would be certainly a top 10 pick based off of the receivers that are available in this draft. I don't think that the Seahawks could get a top 10 pick for DK Metcalf. But my thought is this may be a unique offseason where his value is going to be higher than it ever will be. It doesn't matter that his numbers were a little bit down relative to what you'd hope for. I don't think it really matters that, you know, he has hit some sort of ceiling in terms of what kind of player. He's not going to probably ever be a top 10 receiver in the NFL. But in a general offseason, I would say over the last 3 years, I don't think DK Metcalf's value would have been higher because there was just a huge supply of young receivers coming into the draft. I look at this draft and I think if I am a team that wants to add a dynamic receiver, I'm going to look at this draft and be like, they're not there. And then I'm going to look at DK Metcalf and I'm going to think, and I also, for what it's worth, going to look at this draft and say, there's not a lot of first round picks, like true first round talents in this draft. So I think first round picks, are going to be less valuable, especially from like 15 on, are going to be less valuable than they've been in previous drafts. I think receiver as a position is going to be harder to find in this draft. And so I think that could mean that DK Metcalf, I don't know if it's crazy to say that he might be able to be had for a first round pick. Like, I don't think it's crazy that the Seahawks could get a first round pick, not in the top half of this draft, most likely, but in the second half of the first round. I don't think that's crazy that someone would decide that DK Metcalf is more valuable to them than what they could offer, what they could get otherwise. I think it's just a lower ceiling draft in general. And I think DK Metcalf still has a pretty strong reputation in terms of what he can do athletically. So just something to think about. You know, obviously people would say, oh, like let's trade Geno Smith. My question there would be, who's going to trade for him and what are you going to get for him? I think with DK Metcalf, once again, this is probably the only opportunity you're going to have to make that decision. It's probably the highest his value is going to be. And it's in a draft where you may not have another draft that has as few interesting wide receivers. And you're probably not going to have as many teams looking for a difference-making wide receiver than you're going to have this offseason. So that's kind of my point with the DK Metcalf piece. I think this may be your best opportunity to optimize your return. I also think that he's the least likely person that John Schneider wants to trade. So I wouldn't necessarily put a lot on that as a likely outcome. But I do think his value and the potential what you could get back is probably the highest it's going to be. With that, let me give everyone a quick reminder. This episode is brought to you by Pagliacci Pizza. And right now, they have got rosemary potato primo. It is a chicken seasoned in a sweet and spicy marinade combined with roasted rosemary potatoes. Yes, potatoes. pickled red onions, Casseri cheese, and mozzarella over roasted garlic oil, red pepper flakes. Finish with a parsley after the bake. Man. With that, I got to bring in our guest who's been brought to us all season by Pagliacci Pizza, Robert Mays of The Athletic. How are you doing this fine Monday, Robert?
I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. I'm in post-holiday overcorrection mode in terms of what I'm trying to do to my body. So that sounds incredible right now. And it's going to be on my mind for the entire time that we're talking. I'm sorry. I'm going to be distracted.
That's fine. It's on my mind all the time. And we're going to try to fit in, what you and Derek probably did in 90 minutes yesterday. We're going to try to fit that into 30 here. So we got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to get Pagliacci's money's worth for this next 30 minutes. And before we do, I was just talking about, I want to get your quick take on this. I know we've talked about the DK Metcalf trade. Am I crazy to think that I know you probably haven't gotten deep in draft prep, but this draft is very thin on receiver. There's just not the top end receiver talent that you're going to see from past drafts. It feels like there's a lot of teams that have young quarterbacks that need a difference making receiver. Is this potentially the highest value timed? If you're going to get a high pick for DK Metcalf, is this potentially the draft where you could get the highest return on your investment?
Potentially. I don't know enough about the pool of wide receivers to say that. But if that's the case, then maybe that's one of the factors. And I also think that with receivers, there's a cliff for receivers. If you are acquiring a receiver that's close to 30 or on the wrong side of 30, your return just isn't there compared to getting a guy who's 27, 28 years old. So I think that time is also a factor. And, this is always going to be a question of, is the return and the opportunity cost going to be worth it? Are the resources you're going to get back in a DK Metcalf trade, the way that you can use them, is that in the best interest of the Seattle Seahawks over a 2 to 3 year period? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think that it's at least something that you should think about and consider.
So Wildcard weekend, a lot of things to walk away from in those games. We still have one game left to play tonight, unfortunately in Glendale instead of LA. We wish everyone in LA who's struggling the best and hope they're doing as best as they can. But with the games that did happen, I want to start by just talking about high-level takeaways. What are some things that we've learned from this weekend that are legitimate lessons to maybe just to reflect on, and maybe what are some things that maybe are not? And one of the things I wanted to start out with Robert is, the old saying, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmy and the Joes, right? I had to say that.
Yeah, Tom Brady reminded me of it yesterday while watching that game.
Yes. So this weekend felt like that embodied, because I'm not sure I saw a lot of schemes, coaching-based moments that were the differences in this game, but I can think of a lot of moments where individual players just willed and dominated their opposition in this game. What's your take on that?
I think that's probably true. I think if you look at, there are examples, though, that kept these games closer than they should have been. I think that what Jeff Hafley has done in Green Bay this year, I've been very impressed with. And they did a very good job of containing that Seahawks offense, or that Eagles offense. I'm getting my birds confused. Yeah, of containing that Eagles offense. The problem was their offense couldn't do anything in that game. And I do feel like you felt that. I feel like the talent gap absolutely was on display in a lot of these games. You look at what Josh Allen was for the Bills. You look at what the combination of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry were for the Ravens. Eventually the Eagles, Dallas Goedert makes a ridiculous play it's their best offensive play of the day. I think that's probably a fair place to land, is that when you get to the playoffs, you do feel the talent gap in ways that you might not over a 17 game stretch.
Also related to that, felt like if you don't have 2 or 3 of the best players on the field in those games, you're gonna have a hard time. The teams, the Green Bay seems like a good example of this. You can have a lot of good players, but if you don't have the best players on the field, it's pretty hard to win, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, the comparison we made about them yesterday, just kind of looking at their roster construction and what things have looked like over the last few years, it almost reminds me a little bit of the discussion we've had about Buffalo recently, where you look at Buffalo and you think, oh, that's a solid roster. Like they've done a good job putting that thing together, but there aren't a lot of home runs. And I think the Bills this year, Greg Rousseau took a step forward, Christian Benford did, but that was the discussion we were having about the Bills a lot over the last couple seasons. The difference with Buffalo is that they have Josh Allen. Right. So they have an insane multiplier at the most important position. And even if I think Jordan Love is probably better than she showed yesterday and has shown at times this season while he's been banged up, he is not that sort of quarterback. And so you feel the lack of like true high level difference makers on that Green Bay team. And that's partially because the guys they've drafted early over the last 3 or 4 years, even if they're contributing pieces, haven't really ascended to that place.
Next one I wanted to ask you about. Are running quarterbacks a requirement now? Is it not just a nice thing to have? But if you look at this weekend, obviously Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, no questions there. Even CJ Stroud had 42 yards rushing this weekend. Is it not just a nice to have? Is it becoming a must have?
Your margin for error is so much slimmer if you don't have one. I think that's the place that I land. And I still think that the Lions, as constructed, are very dangerous on offense because they've built such a monster top to bottom. Schematically, they give themselves such an advantage. But having that guy that can be a break in case of emergency player is really, really useful when you're playing against the best teams and often the best defenses in the league. The playoffs last year were an example of this. One of the reasons that the 49ers got to the Super Bowl last year is because of what Brock Purdy was doing with his legs. And you compare that to a Lions team they played in the NFC Championship game where Jared Goff did get bothered in the pocket, a little bit more than he had at other times that year. And I think it absolutely is something worth considering, like what you can do as a scrambling quarterback in terms of just making irrelevant whatever deficiencies you had in the play call and whatever the defense did right. That becomes incredibly important in the highest leverage moments of the season.
Yeah, none more so than watching the Bucs game. We'll get into each game in a bit, but when they kept 2 spies in for Jaden Daniels and he rips that ball over the middle. I mean, Geno Smith, a lot of players would love to have that kind of amount, a number of defenders dedicated to something other than covering his receivers.
Yeah, or rushing the passer. Them bringing 3 in that.
Exactly.
Them bringing 3 in that situation is, to me, indefensible. I don't think that you can drop 8 in that moment and feel good about the call. But I've had my quibbles with a lot of the things that the Bucs have done on defense over the last 6 to 8 weeks or so.
Yes, Todd Bowles, interesting coaching situation. Next one I wanted to bring up for you. This is kind of an observation I've had all year, and I'm wondering where you are with this. There's a lot of focus on these great coaches that have these great moments where they game plan for their opponent and they come up with something that exploits a weakness. What I see is that predictable and unstoppable beats opponent optimized game plannings every single time. You know exactly what the Eagles are going to do. You know exactly what the Bills are going to do. You know what the Lions are going to do. You know what these great teams are going to do. Reminds me back of like Tom Brady's sneak, the Seahawks with Steve Hutchinson, Walter Jones, and Sean Alexander. You knew what they were going to do, but you could not stop it. Do you think that this weekend you saw some of that where knowing what you're going to get was not enough? If they're unstoppable and doing it, the tush push, all those kinds of things, those are the weapons that really make the difference in these moments.
I think you need both. Because if you look at the way the Seahawks offense played yesterday, I keep doing this. If you look at the way the Eagles offense played yesterday, the Eagles offense did not do enough to win a game with the other team doing anything of consequence. Like the Eagles had like a 40% offensive success rate yesterday. They needed a 18-yard scoring drive on a fumbled opening kickoff in order to put up that point total. I mean, the difference in that game yesterday is 3 turnovers by the Packers offense. If you look at the offenses that were exceptional this weekend, the plan is absolutely detailed and layered to go along with the force of nature talent that they have. I thought that Joe Brady was awesome yesterday. in some of the wrinkles that he put forth for that Bills offense. All the 6 offensive lineman stuff that they did. If you look at some of the really subtle formation, alignment, and motions that they were using in the passing game, they were really making it consistently hard on the Broncos the entire game. Having Josh Allen certainly helps, but when you pair that with the right game plan and the right approach, you get those final results. The amount of eye candy the Ravens create in their running game is a product of the details associated with that offense. It certainly helps to have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, but they're making it even more difficult because it's deployed in the right way. And the same thing goes with the Texans. Like, the Texans have an overwhelming level of talent on defense in the right moments, especially against teams that don't have a lot of high-end receiving talent. If you can't challenge them, 2 things. If you're not equipped to deal with the way that they can create chaos in the pocket with some of those 5-0 overload looks that they use, and you don't have receivers that they're scared of in man coverage, they can become just this force that dismantles you. We saw that a bunch of times this season. They did it to the Bills. They did it to the Bears. They just did it to the Chargers. So I think that it's a combination of having the talent that you can wield, but also having the right game plan to really pick at the areas where the teams you're playing against are weakest.
Makes sense. Any other like general takeaways you had from the weekend? We're going to get into the individual games here in a sec.
You got to be able to run the football, right? Like, you have to be able to be a flexible offense. And when I think about the Bills, obviously the Ravens have always been this, right? The Ravens have been able to run the ball since Lamar got there. They've been the best running team in football. Now their flexibility is being able to throw it on their own terms and being less susceptible to certain pressure-centric defensive game plans. But Buffalo, they've been building to this for years. And when you look at what they were under Brian Daboll, they were not able to run the ball in these key situations. It was not a priority of theirs. And if you look at what they've done from a personnel perspective, but also the emphasis that Joe Brady has put on them being not necessarily a run-first team, but a team that can run when the situation calls for it, they've been building to that. And that's why they feel so overwhelming, even if you're a really good defense, because they can tap into whatever version they want to tap into.
Let's get into the individual games. We'll go back and forth on these rapid fire style. So Washington, Tampa Bay, maybe the most fun game of the weekend, depending on your perspective. What was the lesson learned from this game for you?
Operational things are very, very important in high leverage games. Timeout usage, snap exchanges, et cetera, and 4th down decision making. I mean, Washington doing what they did and being so aggressive ultimately comes up huge for them over the course of that game. So I think that's probably the number one thing, and just being able to have a quarterback who can get you out of sticky situations. They were so good this year at picking apart zone coverage when you would leave air in the defense, and that they were just such a completion oriented passing game. And when you have to play zone coverage against them because you're afraid of playing man because he can run, it just leaves your hands tied as a defensive coordinator. And so I think that having a quarterback who can really frustrate you no matter what you're trying to do against him because of what he can do with his legs, and being really, really tightened up, and when it comes to the details late in games, I think those are probably my 2 biggest takeaways from that.
I'll throw a couple others out for you. So this goes in the general takeaway as well, but specifically I'm going to pick this game. People talk a lot about explosives for good reason. Short yardage seems pretty dang important. If you look at the teams in the NFL this year on 3rd or 4th down and 3 yards or less, the top teams in converting those: Washington, 64.5%, Baltimore, 64%, Tampa Bay was 46%, Atlanta was 56%. By the way, it seems like the NFC South not so great at defending these plays. The Chargers, 56%, Detroit, 55%, Philadelphia, 55%. Being able to determine the outcome on 3rd and 4th and short feels like it makes 1st and 2nd a completely different problem to solve for an offensive coordinator. I'm curious if you've noticed the same thing.
I totally agree with that. And I think that understanding you have 4 downs changes what you can do as a play caller too. And I think that the Lions are a very good example of this. The Lions will run the ball on 3rd and 5 if the situation calls for it, because they know they're going for it on 4th and 2. And having an organizational mindset about how you're going to handle those situations it really gives freedom and power to your play caller. It gives freedom and power to your players. And I think that you feel that start to creep in. Buffalo is one of those teams that I think Dan Quinn deserves a lot of credit for this too. Defensive-minded head coaches can occasionally get too conservative. And so Buffalo going and saying, we're going to be a team that consistently goes for it on fourth down. Washington being a team that's consistently going to go for it on fourth down. It empowers every single aspect of your offense and your organization in the right way. And I think that we're starting to see the benefits of that.
Some bad news, good news for Seahawks. And I'll give you a little Bears stuff too. The Seahawks were 30th in the NFL in converting these plays, a short yardage. It was an absolute nightmare this year. The good news, the Seahawks defense, number 1 in the NFL in limiting these plays, 38.8% conversion for opponents in these situations. Number 2, the Baltimore Ravens. The Bears were number 4. So I got you a little something there, Robert.
I'm sure they were down at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to offense, though.
You know what? They were pretty high up.
Oh, really?
Believe it or not, surprising. They were like 10th in the NFL in converting third and fourth and short. So
that is surprising.
A little surprise there. Yes, I was surprised as well. Next, a couple other things on this. Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, like he's suffered through so many bad quarterbacks, and now he's finally got a great one. And I think it's pretty clear he's got a great one. And I think he's still underappreciated. Like, how good was he in this game yesterday?
As good as he's been all year. And I think that early in his career, he was described and kind of conceived of as this vertical threat, like a separation vertical guy. I think in the same way we talk about like a Chris Olave, where they have a lot of downfield juice, but they also have a lot of nuance to route running, things of that nature. But what Terry has done in the contested catch situations this year and just giving his young quarterback a 50-50 outlet is incredible. And I think that it's really fun when you have these guys who are very good receivers that for whatever reason are in less than ideal circumstances, and you see those change, and then we get to really find out what sort of players they are. And I wish it would have happened 3 years earlier for Terry McLaurin, but I'm very glad that he is finally getting his moment this way.
Did the bloom come off the rose a little bit for Liam Cohen in this game against a not that great Washington defense?
No. If you look at the down-to-down success of like that offense, they just didn't have the ball. I mean, they at one point in the game, I think the time of possession was like 30. Like Washington had like a 10-minute advantage in time of possession, and so if you're not shooting yourself in the foot at multiple different times, I mean, when the Bucs had the ball in this game, they moved the ball very consistently and very efficiently. So I'm still pretty excited about what we have seen from Liam Cohen over the course of this entire year.
All right. Give me we're going to ask you for each of the teams that was eliminated, your optimism scale on a scale of 1 to 5. I'll give you 5 being the most optimistic, 1 being the least. So how optimistic should Tampa Bay fans be heading into next season?
I'd say 3. I think that organizationally, they deserve some benefit of the doubt. I think they've done a really good job at building this roster in the post Tom Brady era, when there actually have been some impediments to keeping it together because of some of the financial things they had to do and moving the money around after Brady left. They're still paying that bill in some small ways. I mean, if you look at the money, like Chris Godwin has an $18 million dead cap hit next year because of some of the things that they had to do with his contract. They've consistently refreshed this roster with young pieces. Yaya Diaby, Kalijah Kancey, Luka Decky has become, Graham Barton this year. I really like how they've conceived of roster construction and talent acquisition over the last couple of years. I think that Todd Bowles leaves something to be desired as a head coach. And I feel like your ceiling is probably limited with what he is giving you. The defense has faltered, and their in-game decision-making and management is not at the same level you want with some of these other playoff teams. And then the other part of this is what happens with Liam Cohen. If Liam Cohen does end up leaving, and there's been less interest in him as a head coaching candidate than I expected, given the success that he has had and given how relatively shallow the offensive coordinator pool is. So there's a reasonable chance that he's back, but I would be keeping an eye on that. I'd be keeping an eye on what the 2 to 3 year outlook for you is based on whether you can retain Liam Cohen, whether it's your head coach or whether you're OC or your head coach, and what's going to happen with Todd Bowles. So I'm relatively optimistic because I think they, again, deserve the benefit of the doubt, but I think there are things that would give me a little bit of pause.
Let's talk about Denver Buffalo. What was your major takeaway from this game?
Josh Allen is just a force of nature. Like every time it's 3rd and 3 or less in a playoff game, I'm confident they're getting it. And because if you just want to run quarterback power with him out of the gun, you can. Again, it's just such a wild thing to be able to tap into. And again, just really impressed with their game plan on offense and just what they're able to tap into with the physical version of this football team. And if you look at how they were running the ball early on, they used 6 offensive linemen on 16 plays in this game, which I think is up there with the most that they had done in a single game all year. And Denver's run defense have been really good this season, but it is an undersized group. There's a lot of slanting. There's a lot of stunting. And so what Buffalo essentially said was, we're going to put 6 offensive linemen on the field. We're going to use our wide receivers as like insert fullbacks on some of these runs and just run downhill at you for like 6 yards at a time. We're going to combine that with one of the most physically talented quarterbacks who's ever lived. And then again, some of the wrinkles that they were using with formations and motions and just tiny ways that they were making things more difficult on the Broncos. I thought overall it was a phenomenal performance from that side of the ball.
Yeah, it felt a little traumatic, like reliving the Seahawks Bills game. Just gonna push you around, and there's nothing you can do about it. It is one of the most helpless feelings you can have as a fan when you watch your team in that situation. The other thing that I would point out there, let's get to your Denver optimism scale for the Broncos, because my pointing out is going to relate to that. Where on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you rate their optimism, or where should their optimism be?
I'd probably say like 3.5 to 4. I was very impressed with what Sean Payton did this year. It was fun to see Sean Payton kind of reinvigorate as an offensive play caller and as an offensive architect. You know, you watch what they did over the last 6 weeks of the season, and I just thought the screen game, you know, some of the things that they were doing to give Bo Nix easy completions, just the details associated with it. It felt like watching a New Orleans offense again. And I just didn't know if we'd ever get that version of Sean Payton back. So I think that the infrastructure of what they can be offensively, because of the offensive line that was one of the best pass protection groups in the NFL this year, that will come back fully intact, combined with Sean Payton and a cost-controlled quarterback. I just think that there's a lot of unrealized potential upside there when they can start spending a little bit more money and if they add another piece or two to that offense. And I think that the defense was one of the best groups in the league. You know, you got steamrolled by a Buffalo offense that is capable of doing that to people, but I think that some of the individual core pieces that they have on the defensive side of the ball, you know, they add another safety to the mix now that they have more resources, things like that. I think that there's reason to be pretty excited if you're a Broncos fan. The bet on Sean Payton was correct. And that ultimately, I think, is the most important consideration when you're thinking about the Chargers, or I keep doing this, when you're thinking about the Broncos, both now and moving forward.
Yeah, my takeaway there is if you had a team that their biggest needs were tight end, running back, maybe a run stuffing defensive tackle, those happen to be
safety.
3 that, safety would be another.
Yeah.
Those are actually 4
that's
of
what
them.
You want.
In this particular draft, those are 4 of the deepest areas. Like, so they're very set up to, I think, make a pretty big step forward next year. If I'm not a Broncos fan, but I would be pretty optimistic if I was. Let's talk about this Philadelphia Green Bay. I don't know if we'll get to the other 2 games, but let's talk about this one. And my first one is a question for you: is Vic Fangio the best coach in Philadelphia?
I kind of think undeniably he is. I think that Nick Sirianni's done a fine job, and eventually, when you're the head coach, you deserve credit for wins and losses like that. You deserve at least partial credit for wins and losses. It is undeniable that they have a fantastically talented roster, and I think that what Howie Roseman did this offseason, if he's not the executive of the year, then he's on the short list. Zach Bond's making $3 million and was first team All-Pro, but they've done a very good job just of organizational stability over the last few years. And I think the head coach deserves some credit for that. But you know, what Vic Fangio has done with that group, they're suffocating, man. And just my favorite play, I think, from the entire wild card round was that play where Elton Jenkins gets hurt early in that game for the Packers, where Nolan Smith just puts his face in Elton Jenkins's chest. And on the same play, Kobe Dean is just flying into the B gap. It's like, all right, that's the type of day it's going to be. Like that's what you're going to be dealing with all day. And for Vic Fangio to have created that sort of defense on a dime in 1 year, when this group went being one of the oldest defenses in the league to now being one of the youngest defenses, it is one of the most impressive transformations we saw in the NFL this season.
Other question I had for you is, I'm not going to ask you to really count, but how many roughly quarterbacks do you think could be playing behind that offensive line in Philadelphia with that running game and those receivers and increase the odds that the Philadelphia Eagles would win the Super Bowl? It's got to be like 10 maybe, right? Like,
I think that's probably a safe number.
I mean, Jalen Hurts to me I've actually enjoyed Jalen Hurts at times, but he seems so unimpressive behind what is just like, it's got to be the best quarterback situation in football, right?
I think from a talent perspective, yes. I still think that there are more dynamic offenses around the league in terms of how you're creating separation, just what you're doing simply by design. But I think from a talent perspective, you can make an argument that it's the most talented supporting cast in the NFL. And so, yeah, I think that Jalen Hurts has always probably been, down in like second or third tier of quarterbacks in the league, if we're being honest about like what he's doing for that offense. And I think that that's true again this year.
Other thing I wonder about in this one, Robert, Packers have been an interesting experiment to me. And how many number 2 receivers can you have on one roster? And is that greater than one number 1? Are we getting the answer pretty clearly is it's not?
You have to have something that lifts them like definitively. And that's kind of what I mean with Buffalo, right? Like Buffalo can have a bunch of number 2s if you have Josh Allen, but that's not what Jordan Love is. Even if Jordan Love is how we bucket these guys is interesting. I think Jordan Love can be the quarterback of an elite NFL offense when surrounded by the right things. And I think there have been times where if you look at what the Packers offense is year in and year out, they are one of the most efficient offenses in the league. But when you get to these moments where the talent really does matter and you kind of see the separation between these teams, I think you feel the ceiling that they're bumping up against because of the lack of high-end talent they have. And that extends to the offensive line, right? Like this entire offense is more than the sum of its parts. And at a certain point, you are going to need guys who move the needle. If the quarterback is that guy, then the other pieces become a little bit less important. But if the quarterback is not that guy, then you're going to need at a couple of the other positions. And they just don't have that right now.
Yeah, Green Bay to me is one of the most fascinating lessons to learn. And let me get your optimism scale, 1 to 5 on them. Where should Green Bay fans be?
I think it's 4. I think that, again, their just organizational competency and what they've been able to do consistently year in and year out. This is still a very stable place that I think is run by people who are generally pretty good at their jobs. Matt LaFleur has had a rough month, but I'm looking back on a lot of earned equity from what Matt LaFleur has been as a head coach and as an offensive architect and play caller. I would like to see them be a little bit more, take a little longer look in the mirror when it comes to what they may need to add to the offense from a talent perspective this offseason. The perfect example to me, and I understand how people land in this place, Rasheed Walker, right? I think Rasheed Walker was perfectly acceptable at left tackle for the Packers over the last couple of years. And what they told themselves is, well, we didn't need to upgrade at that spot necessarily because he was good enough and we could kind of shift things around in other places. I get that, but I think at a certain point, and credit to Brian Gutekunst, they have been willing to do this in ways other eras of the Packers have not been. Sometimes you need to do drastic things. And I think I would like to see the Packers do a couple drastic things this offseason to potentially break through that ceiling that we're talking about.
Yeah, if you had told me after last year that the Packers would make massive leaps on defense and in the run game, and that they would exit this season feeling worse than they did exiting last season, I wouldn't have believed you. So it's a very fascinating team. I think Jordan Love's in the middle of that and figuring out what exactly he is or isn't. We'll find out. In the last minute I have with you, quick thoughts on Seahawks OC candidates that we've heard about so far. Hank Fraley, Thomas Brown, who you know a little bit about, and Clint Kubiak.
The Hank Fraley thing is hilarious.
I knew
It's
you'd like
just,
that.
to me, it's just the funniest overcorrection possible. And I honestly think that, and listen, this is different than if you let's go back to Green Bay. The Packers offensive coordinator is an offensive line coach, is their former offensive line coach. The Dolphins offensive coordinator is a former offensive line coach. I believe those might be the only two in the league. Like, obviously Andy Reid was an offensive line coach 30 years ago, but
Yeah.
I think those are the only two guys who went straight from being an offensive line coach to their current role. And that's easier when you have a play calling head coach. So you don't have to really worry as much about it. And being able to retain that offensive line coach because you've promoted him, that becomes a nice little thing you can do organizationally. But I think offensive line coaches as OCs is probably an untapped thing because they are so important to the success of your team. I'm surprised we haven't seen it a little bit more often. That being said, how does Frank Fraley call a passing game? I don't know. He may be quietly a genius when it comes to that stuff. I couldn't begin to speak to it, but I think the idea and having the conversation with him about the job, I like where Mike's head is at with that. The Clint Kubiak part of this is the least surprising type of candidate you could possibly ask for, because I think that the reservations about Ryan Grubb and ultimately the shortcomings of Ryan Grubb are a failure to have a connection between your run game and your pass game. That's exactly what Kubiaks do. Like, that's literally at the centerpiece. That's at the center of what a Kubiak offense is a cohesive marriage between the run and the pass and an identity that is often rooted in play action. So to see them sniffing around the people that they're sniffing around right now, not the least bit surprised, because I think it's an indication of where the gaps potentially were with what Mike wants and what the offense looked like last season.
Robert, I'm going to get you out of here. Before I do, myself and the Hawk Blogger community wanted to thank you for a great season. It's been a blast. And know you lost a pet you love, Molly, recently. So we made a donation to Paws of Chicago in Molly's name, and just wanted to honor her and appreciate all the time you spent with us this season.
I really appreciate that. That means a lot. It's we've thought a lot about her over the last few weeks, and we miss her a lot. And we are we've glued ourselves to the Paws Instagram page when it comes to adoptable dogs over the last couple of weeks. So they do a great job, and it's very kind of you guys. So thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure to be here, and I'm sure we'll keep doing it in the off season.
Love it. We will figure that out. And thank you to Pagliacci for bringing Robert to us all the time. Have a great rest of your day, Robert.
You guys too. Talk to you soon.
All right. That was Robert Mays. Again, brought to you by Pagliacci Pizza, the best pizza you're going to find here in Seattle. Absolutely love it. And I am a huge fan of the pepperoni and the Pagliaccio salad. It is so good. You can also, if you want, they still got this Yeti ice cream from Molly Moon's. Vanilla ice cream swirled with vanilla bean caramel mixed with chunks of Theo chocolate, local chocolatier, and Molly Moon's homemade granola. I mean, what's going to be bad about that? So that was Robert Mays. And we're going to talk about what we're going to do for the offseason. He and I are already having conversations. We'll figure out what Pagliacci wants to do, have my conversations with Pat. We'll go from there. But what a pleasure to have Robert Mays all season. I think he's the best in the business at what he does. And to me, he is, Peter King-esque in just knowing everything that's going on in the league and having a smart point of view on just about all of it. So interesting thoughts from him there. I see that we've got a super chat. I want to get this out there. This is from Bryce. He says, "Hi, Brian and Robert. Out of the teams that were eliminated this weekend, who are some potential OC candidates you'd be interested in Seattle interviewing? Thanks for the great show." Sorry, Bryce couldn't get to this during Robert's time. Well, let's go over it. So number one on that list would be Adam Stenavich from the Green Bay Packers, the OC there under LaFleur. He certainly is a name that would be of interest and has been rumored to be a potential interest. Again, former offensive line coach, and does not have play calling responsibility for the Packers, which is why he'd be available as a potential. On the other sides, Tampa Bay, I don't know if there's anyone there that I think. Denver, I don't know if there's anyone. Let's take a quick look. Why not? Let's do a quick look. I don't mind taking a second here. So let me look at the Tampa Bay coaching staff, and I'll tell you if there's anything there that piques my interest. And then we will look at, the Denver coaching staff. You never know under Sean Payton whether there's a name there that might be of interest. Tom Moore, remarkably, is an assistant coach still. This is the Tom Moore that coached Peyton Manning, has been an OC for a million years. He is 86 years old. So I don't think you're going to be hiring Tom Moore, but that's amazing. Let's take a look at Denver under Sean Payton and if they have anybody that's of interest. Pete Carmichael. So Joe Lombardi is their OC right now. He had been the OC with the Chargers in 2022 and with the Lions in 2014 and 2015. So he's had some experience. Interestingly, Joe Lombardi was born in Seattle. He was born June 6, 1971 in Seattle. So maybe Joe Lombardi's a name we should be talking about. Thanks for the call out here to look. His teams, when he was coaching with Denver, I think the last 2 years, obviously that's a Sean Payton team with the Chargers in 2022 and 2021. In 2022, they had the 9th ranked offense in yards, the 13th in points. In 2021, they had the 4th ranked offense in yards, 5th in points. It was much more of a passing oriented offense. They were number 2 in passing yards, number 3 in passing yards, number 3 in pass attempts, number 2 in pass attempts. So he may be a little bit too pass oriented. He does have some defensive background. He's a defensive line coach back in the 90s. He's been a defensive assistant. He's been a quarterbacks coach. Not a bad name, to be honest. At least something that's worth thinking about. Another name, Pete Carmichael, is the senior offensive assistant. He's been with Sean Payton pretty much everywhere. So maybe there's something there. He has been a quarterbacks coach. He has been a passing game coordinator. And then he has been an offensive coordinator for many, many years. He is now the senior offensive assistant with the Saints. So that's another potentially interesting name that I don't think we've heard from anybody. Who else was eliminated? We can look at the Chargers. I know that there is, if we've got Nasir with us today, he's been asking about one guy in particular for the Chargers that might be of interest. That's Marcus Brady, who is a passing game coordinator for them. He's 45 years old. He has been an OC most recently for the Indianapolis Colts in 2021 and 2022. He had a pretty bad go of it, at least in 2022. In 2021, he had an interesting offense. 5th in rushing attempts, 2nd in rushing yards, 9th in points in offense. So if you look at that 2021 Indianapolis team, what you get, that was a team coached by Frank Reich. So Frank Reich is an interesting name as well to keep in mind. But that was a team that had Carson Wentz as its quarterback primarily, and they really ran around Jonathan Taylor. So that was a team that, was a 9-8 team. Not that interesting of a team, but offensively certainly maybe fits the mold of what I think Mike Macdonald's looking for. They're not going to get Greg Roman as the OC. Mark Trestman is their senior offensive assistant. Trestman is an interesting guy. He's a little older, 68 years old. He has been a head coach for Chicago. He's been an OC for a number of different teams, most recently the Baltimore Ravens in 2016 and 2015. So is Mark Trestman potentially an interesting name to follow? That would have overlapped with Mike Macdonald a little bit. offensively, we're not that great when Trestman was the OC back then. You take a look at the 2016 Baltimore Ravens. That's the last part of Joe Flacco's career. And your running backs were guys like Terrence West and Kenneth Dixon. Kyle Juszczyk was still there, Justin Forsett. So they did not have a particularly powerful offense back then. Trestman's an interesting name, though. If you go back, probably his best showing as an OC was early on in the 90s with the San Francisco 49ers. He also had a decent year with the Oakland Raiders back in 2002 when Bill Callahan was the coach. That was a team that was coached by Rich Gannon, or not coached by Rich Gannon, quarterbacked by Rich Gannon. Had a Charlie Garner was the running back. They finished, number 2 in the NFL in points scored, number 1 in the NFL in yards gained. Made it all the way to the Super Bowl that year. I believe that was the year Rich Gannon was the MVP. So that's probably Mark Trestman's biggest calling card. He's an interesting name to keep in mind. Who else lost this weekend? We talk about the Packers. We've already gone through that group. The Tampa Bay Bucks. Let's take a look at the Bucks coaching staff, see if there's anyone other than Liam Cohen who is not available who might be interesting. I already went through them. Never mind. My memory is pretty short. Great question by Bryce. Thanks for asking it. Some interesting names, I think, surfaced from that. I want to thank Detail Oriented. Great to see you back. Gifting Hawk Blogger memberships, 10 Hawk Blogger memberships. Really, really appreciate it. Reflect the Sun also gifts 5 Hawk Blogger memberships. Appreciate that as well. That is 15 people that just got a free month of Hawk Blogger memberships thanks to the generosity of Detail Oriented, Reflect the Sun. If you get one of these free memberships, consider paying it forward. Give one to somebody else or just extend your membership past a month because it's going to be amazing the next few months, the next few weeks, the next few months as we head into draft prep, as we get more details on the offensive coordinators, as we are going to get into free agency. I mean, the offseason is kind of almost the best because you can't be hurt so much in the offseason. It's just a nice place to be. So make sure you sign up over at patreon.com/hawkblogger as well. Get all the access to, the interviews I'll be doing at Senior Bowl, get access to the audio versions of this podcast every single day, all the other good stuff as well. So patreon.com/hawkblogger is the place to go. And then I, as always, have to remind you, because we are days away, literally, from giving away this amazing pair of Seahawks themed boots from JK Boots. And if you don't remember, we just gave away a pair of boots to a LA firefighter so that they could have the safest footwear to keep them safe and supported while they're fighting these fires. And I really appreciate the partnership. It's a Spokane-based, family-owned company. The best boots you will ever own. I love my JK boots. Feel great wearing them. I even don't have to wear my orthotics when I'm wearing them. They're the only shoes I've ever worn in my life that I don't have to wear my orthotics because the arch support's so good and they just mold to your feet. So absolutely use the code, get 10% off. Use code HawkBlogger, get you 10% off, get you a chance to win that pair of Seahawks themed boots. And we're working on what our next amazing incentive is going to be. After I give these boots away, we'll be looking at what's next. So make sure you do that. Also, I keep forgetting, every dollar you spend using code HawkBlogger enters you with a chance to win a Ford Raptor. So, there's so many things that are reasons to use your code HawkBlogger over at JK Boots. They keep coming, and I know a lot of you have taken advantage of them. Let me know what you think of your boots. I think everyone I've heard from loves them. So take a look, take a try, give them a try yourself. You won't be sorry. All right, folks. I see some people asking about how you get access to these gifted memberships. You do have to go in. I think it's like there's 3 dots or something on the chat, and then you have to enable membership or something like that to be able to be gifted one of these free memberships. And the way that they get handed out is based off of how much you engage with the show, how many of the shows you've watched, liked, subscribed, commented on, engaged in chat. So I love the fact that YouTube makes this kind of meritocracy. Like the people that are most engaged with what's going on this channel are the ones that are going to get the best chance to get a free membership. So appreciate that. All right, everybody, that will do it for this fine Monday morning for Hawk Blogger Mornings. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll be back with you tomorrow. And tomorrow, folks, you're not going to want to miss it. We are getting right back into it with Ryan Fowler, who is from the Draft Network. We're going to talk about players to look at in the Senior Bowl. That'll be early tomorrow morning. I think we're going to be at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning Pacific time. So set your alarms, and I will see you then. Until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.